Welcome once again to our show, and I'm Frank Avila, your host. And that song is kind of apropos. I did not pick it, but it's kind of a good coincidence, or as some say, providence. That it talks about a lazy river, and it talks about the shade of the tree, and hearing the robin birds sing. Because I have today an environmentalist. He is an author and a book publisher, and his name is Tim Magner. And Tim, welcome on our show.
Thanks, Frank.
And, you know, just speaking of that, so maybe that's the first topic, is that the song kind of says, you know, spending time by the river, the lazy river, kind of relaxing out in nature. You are a big proponent of kids getting out into nature. You're a big proponent of recess. In fact, you sent me, is it a Wall Street Journal article?
I believe it was.
Wall Street Journal article that recess is good for the mind. And you were telling me that, at least in Chicago, the policy of the Chicago public schools is not significant or not big enough on recess. So tell me a little bit about why you think kids getting out of nature and kids having recess is good. And I think the two are connected. That's why I'm asking you to take together.
No, it's a fair question. Recess is really unstructured outdoor activity is sort of one of the things that we were proponents of. And our mission and kind of what we'd like to do is talk about growing green minds and getting kids hooked on nature. And recess, while we can say recess is just a couple minutes outside, it's an opportunity to go ahead and develop a whole heck of a lot of skills that are useful for later in life. And when I hear from, be it teachers or be it from parents, hey, we don't have time for recess, it sort of tells me that, you know, maybe we ought to take a step back and look at why we don't have enough time for recess.
Okay. And there's some studies done. I know that Wall Street Journal article, it said there's some studies done that kids who have more recess are actually healthier and better adapted and actually are doing better in school in the academics that they want to focus on, maybe to exclude recess. Is that right?
Sure. No, I think you're exactly right. That it's more than just anecdotal that says getting kids outside, playing outside, is more than just playtime, right?
Okay.
And I know you know history, and if you look at it from a historical context, for a long, long time, until real recently, we spent most of our time outside. And it's only recently that we're spending most of our time inside.
Okay. Now, for our viewers, I've known Tim for a long time, and I never knew you in the environmental side, but apparently since you were young, you had that. And I'm going to ask you in a second to read an essay you did, Environmental 101, that was published in a couple different places, and I think is kind of a best way to describe how you were. But I kind of remember you worked at EMC, the Minnesota-based company of with the computer storage, as you call it.
I was in Minnesota for a bunch of years, a Boston-based company, and I did a little time out there as well.
But EMC it was a good stock. It was good money. I know you as a very good golfer. I remember.
Sure.
Since very young, you were a very good golfer. But I didn't know the environmental side. And maybe read that, but then also maybe elaborate on that.
Sure.
As how you developed this environmental side that I guess you had when I knew you.
What are your best memories from childhood? Catching fireflies, building forts, making mud pies, climbing trees? I've spent a lot of time with kids, and there's one thing I know makes sense: letting kids be kids. They're curious. They need time to imagine and play and explore. They want to be inspired, and nature does the trick. We adults know ice caps are melting and forests are burning, but don't make this the focus of children's education. There are far healthier ways to raise environmentally aware kids than to scare them. To be a green kid means getting outside and getting dirty. Children have a natural tendency to bond with the world around them. It's in our genes and part of who we are. Wander with toddlers outdoors and let them dig in the dirt and chase chipmunks. Pay attention as they turn into explorers and connect with nature nearby. In the words of place-based educator David Sobel, if we want children to flourish, we need to give them time to connect with nature and love the earth before we ask them to save it. So what are you waiting for? Grab your kids, get outside, and get dirty.
Okay. Well, it's a great essay. I know it's published in a couple different places, and that kind of, I think, best states your philosophy, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
So now, I guess when I knew you, you were an environmentalist, but I don't know if we knew it by that name, because the term environmentalist either wasn't around, or we weren't cognizant of it, or it was kind of for, you know, girls who didn't shave their legs, and people who didn't flush the toilet, and we kind of viewed them as wackos or something like that. I mean, without
the fringe.
The fringe. So you were an environmentalist at that time, but how did you grow into the consciousness? Well, now this is a career for you. You have a career of promoting green ideas and even practical ideas. and even you write books and you publish books. How did you get into that?
Well, it evolved over a long period of time, and what's funny is, I bet you 3, 4, 5 generations ago, if you were a kid that played outside and loved nature, you were one of every kid did that. These days, if you're doing it and you're running outside and you're playing in the woods, and you're an exception to the rule. So, I mean, if we take a step back and look at the perspective, we've become disconnected with nature. So we're about getting kids outside for unstructured outdoor activity because it's healthy for childhood development. But it's also
what was natural before.
Yes, exactly.
Now, let me just break in for 1 second on that.
Sure.
It seems like there's a lot more sprawl. Even there was quite as much sprawl when we were kids, but there's still even more sprawl. So you're expanding into what were rural neighborhoods where we went to high school. I remember there actually was still, I think, one farm in the Glenview or Wilmette area. I went to Loyola Academy High School, class of '88. And I think there's one farm, but now you see no farms even in the North Shore. But there was a farm here or there in Glenview or Wilmette or some of these areas. Now you see no farms. So you have more sprawl. The second thing is you have an increase. When we were around kids, you had Atari and you had Nintendo, but it was a much smaller Nintendo. Now you have Xbox 360 and PlayStations and Wiis, and there's so much more to do on your computer, so many more movies and videos and internet and YouTube.
And the rise of organized sports.
And then last thing is, though, I see that parents are much more protective of kids. You know, before we could just go out all day, be home at whatever time, and maybe we're a little late. But now, you know, there's fear of kidnapping or abuse or this or that.
Sure.
Kids don't.
Stranger danger.
There's stranger danger is taken to an extreme, maybe justifiably. I don't know, maybe not. But that kids do not have the same freedom as when we were kids. So that's my analysis of why we don't have the same outdoor time. The kids would rather be playing on their Wii or their Xbox or Halo or whatever really great graphic game there is.
And there are great games.
Yeah, there's some great games out there. You know, and so rather than just run around kind of unstructured and do nothing. Is that fair?
Well, is what fair?
Is it fair that those are some of the reasons? The increase in sprawl or the stronger parental controls because of fear of whatever's going on in the world?
Oh, by the way, there are more liability concerns.
Okay. Right? Blame the lawyers, you know, but maybe there's some blame there.
I'm not blaming any lawyers.
So, okay, liability concerns too. So now so what are you doing then to change that? Do you go to schools? Do you talk to community groups? Boy Scouts is probably one of the great vestiges of conservation and of nature. I was a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm a big believer in Boy Scouts. Yep. And that's one of the things where they say, hey, every month we're going to go out to nature. We're going to camp, and we're not going to have certain you know, luxuries of modern life. So what are you doing? What do you do?
Well, we do a couple of different things, but I mean, if I can break it down, it's sort of you look at what's going on with environmental education in nature, right? So kids aren't learning about what's going on in their neighborhoods because they're not spending any time outside in their neighborhoods. And right between the time they get there and by the time they go to lunch, they might learn that the polar bears are drowning up north, and the rainforests are being burned down. So, right, nothing good's going on in nature. Why would I want to go out there anyways? And so the first thing that we're focused on is getting kids to know what's going on right out their backyard, right, at the park down the street, right? They're learning about the rainforest, but they don't know the trees right outside. And there's a whole heck of a lot of fun that can be had just getting to know what's around you and connecting to what's around you. And then as you spend more time out there, you're learning how everything works, right? How are all the connections? And then once they get to the middle school age, you're starting to spend more time because they've already got the connection and they understand how things work. Well, if this is all good and this all helps us, let's work to protect it, perhaps. So they're getting involved in social action once they get to the age where it's appropriate.
Okay. Now, I see that in some of the books you have one called Environmental Guide from A to Z, and I see some of the questions here, and I certainly don't know the answers. It says, how many types of insects live in your backyard? I'm assuming there's quite a few. So you ask these questions then to a kid, is that correct?
Sure.
Now, at first, I'm assuming he may not know, or he tries to count. Maybe he saw, so it's 3 or 4 or 5.
Right.
And I'm assuming there's quite a few. No.
That's right. Yeah. But the part of the idea is to get out, investigate, explore, dig in the dirt.
Okay.
Right. And yeah, we've got parents and teacher guides in addition to the books that go ahead and help the parents engage the kids.
So it goes on to say, have you ever made a map of your local natural community? Ever, like your park or wherever, ever grown a tree? Visit a farmer's market, which are more common today, I think, than when we were growing up. So that's one positive sign. I think more people are into local originating food and organic food. Followed animal tracks in the snow, caught a fish. Okay? So you're encouraging people to do all those things. I think that's a good thing. Now, it goes on, and you say here that, quote from Tim Magner, from you, if we can only get kids to unplug from the electronics long enough to give nature a chance, nature provides all the answers we need. Now, you're not a Luddite, though. You're not somebody you're not Amish, you're not getting away from technology.
Sure.
But you do have a kind of...
I did turn my cell phone off a few minutes ago.
Well, that's good, because otherwise it'd be ringing during the show. I think sometimes it affects all this equipment. But technology seems to be a blessing and a curse. We were talking before on the show before with a medical doctor, and saying that while people are living longer than previous generations, and we have fairly long life in Western than other countries, is we also have the highest rates of heart disease and cancer, and that many people believe that cancer is a result of technology. I had a brain tumor, and some people believe, my doctors actually don't, but some people believe, or some doctors do, that is a result of the cell phone. If you put the cell phone up, it does emit some kind of radioactivity. So is technology also a curse?
Well, I don't know if
as well as a blessing.
I mean, I don't know if technology is a curse. That might be for another topic for another show. Okay. But there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it that we can take advantage of technology to improve standard of living and improve quality of life. Okay. Right? I mean, we've come a long way. I'm not saying we should jump back in the caves and live like we did 10,000 years ago. There are nearly 7 billion people on the earth. That's not possible, but we can use technology and communication to help raise the quality of life and standard of living.
So what is the incentive before the child gets in nature? Because you think once the child gets in nature, he's hooked. What's the incentive to first drag that child away from the electronics?
Well, if you're a parent and you want good for your kids, and I don't know a single parent out there that doesn't want what's best for their child, and unfortunately sometimes being overprotective is not what's in the best interest of the child, right? Like we talked about, you're learning lifelong skills by being outside, digging in the dirt, playing, jumping, right, figuring out how to organize games between different friends. You're figuring out when you fall down, scrape your knee, you get up, right? You shake it off, and it's okay not to have parents there organizing everything here, everything there.
Now, how did you get out of, you were at EMC, very successful, you know, you had stocks, you had a job, you had all these things, then decided, okay, I'm going to become a book publisher, and I'm going to write, because you're not only a book publisher, you're a book author. Is that correct?
That's right.
What are some of the books before you answer that question, what are some of the books you've written, personally?
An environmental guide from A to Z,
which
you talked about, a book about the coming of age of an earthworm. Early the earthworm digs for his life, and then an alphabet book, N is for nature, an environmental alphabet book.
Okay. And did you also write Did You Know?
No.
Okay.
No, that's part of one of the books.
Okay. Did you know? Okay, it's part of one of the books. Because I saw in there it said Queen Cleopatra declared worms to be sacred animals. I did not know that. And why worms are helpful, because you may think certain animals, I hate this worm or I hate this insect, and you may not understand how he plays in, well, I don't know if it's a he, but how it plays into a cycle of life.
Yeah.
And then another fact you have is that thirsty camels can drink a bathtub of water in 10 minutes. And these are facts, scientific facts, important things to know. What are some of the other books that are written by your publishing house?
That's it. That's it for the get-go. I mean, we're starting up, and this is our second year in existence, and we've got a slew of writers and a slew of books that are on the shelf, so to speak, so in the works.
Okay. And so how did you get out of being a successful kind of corporate person? And,
Sure. It evolved over years, but I was, like a lot of other people, a pretty busy guy running around trying to do as well as I could, right? And it got to the point where I said, you know what, I got to take a little bit of break. And I was always a reader, an avid reader, and I just started reading more and more, and as opposed to just pleasure, I was reading about what's going on in the world, current events, and like yourself, I studied a little bit of history, and so I was trying to tie it all together. And it's funny, there was I'm a sort of a fan of Patagonia, and some of their catalogs have got great stories and great articles, and there was one quote in there, and it said, "If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention." So I became a little bit outraged, which, if you're outraged for long enough, you get tired, and it's frustrating. And so I joke that a lot of my friends wouldn't talk to me because, right, I wasn't okay with the status quo, and I was, right, trying to have these debates and these conversations, and they weren't really going all that well.
Well, speaking of outrage with the status quo, I didn't know. I wish I would have found out beforehand, but I read on your website that Al Gore was just in town recently, and you went to see him speak. How was that? And tell us a little bit. I know you said you do not debate the science of global warming, so we're not going to debate the science of global warming. Just tell us, what was the talk about? What did you get out of it? What was the feel there? And if I would have known he was in town, I would have liked to have gone. But yeah. I guess I got to keep up on your website better. I don't.
Al Gore, I've never met him, and right, so I don't know that much more about him than maybe you know about him, and right. I don't necessarily agree with a whole heck of a lot of what he says or why he says what he says. I wish, because he's got a huge audience, I wish he took advantage of that huge audience, having that influence that he's got.
Well, the one positive thing I think he does say, whether or not whatever's going to happen, I don't know, and whatever the science is, I don't know, but that we should conserve, that we should maybe have less reliance on fossil fuels, and that conservation is generally a good thing. So let's say global warming isn't happening.
Right.
Okay, it's whatever the prescriptions are to stop global warming, e.g., solar energy or wind energy or hybrid cars or being more. All are good ideas, regardless if we're headed to some kind of natural disaster or not.
Yeah. No. Right. I mean, I think we can have a conversation regardless of what's happening with global warming. I'll make the argument that if we can get rid of waste and pollution and make a whole heck of a lot of money doing it.
Right. And there can be jobs from a green economy.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, if we cut subsidies for the existing utility infrastructure and energy infrastructure, we can go ahead and save a whole heck of a lot of money. If we incent companies to cut waste and cut pollution, right? And I'm not sure this is the forum to talk about cap and trade or a carbon tax, but I'd go ahead and claim that it would be one of the best things we could do right now.
Now, are you in public schools yet? Have you seen that public schools have kind of embraced some of this? Are they now greening? Are they kids reading these books? Because I remember scientific books, and I remember Boy Scouts. So some of this is what we grew up with, but some of it's kind of different too.
Sure.
You know, at least the exact titles and all this stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's no doubt there's a movement afoot about making our kids, I don't want to say smarter than we were, but maybe more aware of what's going on than we were, right? And right, when I look at how we learned and what our schools taught us and how we think sort of, right, this box here, right, and I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and I can't tell you how many times where they talk about the silos. They go ahead and say, oh, we're going to talk about healthcare today. And then over here, well, we'd love to talk about the environment, but we're talking about energy right now. And what we're missing is that they're all connected. You can't go ahead and fix healthcare, or you can't have a conversation necessarily about healthcare unless you have a conversation about food. And you can't talk about food unless you talk about fossil fuels. And you can't talk about fossil fuels unless you also have a conversation about military or defense spending.
I think you're right. I think everything is interconnected, and we should have a more unity of the way we look at things. But Tim Magner of Green Sugar Press, thank you for being on our show. I hope to have you on again and discuss maybe some specific topics, but I think this is a great overview. And to our viewing audience, thank you for watching. Goodbye. Go green. God bless.